Hey, it's Trent from Marmalade Cream Media, and I'm back with another podcast tip. This is a fun one. This is all about mixing. And really, I'm just going to show you an example of something that needs a lot of work and how I approached it. So let me play you this track here on the bottom. And for now, I have disabled all of the plugin chain here. So I'm just going to let it play for a bit.
Yeah, no, Gabby was what actually prompted me to reach out to you guys
Nice.
because I loved her episode. And I think it's so cool when people, I grew up, I'm 38.
Yeah, so right off the bat, you can tell we've got some problems here. First of all, there's a lot of noise. There's this very low, deep hum. You can hear it very clearly in the gaps of the passage. You know, he was talking continuously there, so it's a little bit harder to hear. But in the gaps, you can notice there's a big hum. And overall, we do have some kind of room echo and stuff, some ambiance. It's not super distracting, but it is kind of adding a washy, sort of muddy sound along with, you know, the noise. And so the whole thing is very dark and it's not clear. It's muddy. So now I'm going to play that again, just a couple seconds of that. So no effects, no plug-in processing.
Yeah, no, Gabby was what actually prompted me to reach out to you guys because
All right, now I'm going to turn on my chain.
Yeah, no, Gabby was what actually prompted me to reach out to you guys because I loved her episode.
There you go. Much better, in my opinion. So let's talk about what I did really quick. So the first thing is that since there's so many there's several different problems going on here, we've got to address them in different different kind of sets of tools. So the first thing, the chain volume adjuster, I'm just bringing it down. The whole thing was a little bit hot, so I'm just kind of bringing it down into a reasonable range. I'm just cutting the whole thing by 6 dB. That's not really doing any tonal processing. The second thing that I do is whenever you hear a low, deep hum, what you can do is you can turn on any EQ that you have. This is just the built-in one in Reaper. Any EQ that you have that has a real-time analyzer in it, and you can isolate some of the hum here. So let's see. Let's solo this track, and let's find a little spot here where there's not any talking. And yeah, there we go. There we go. So we'll see when we isolate this little section and play it, there's a lot of energy happening here underneath or below 100 hertz, right? So that's information that's not useful. It's not stuff that we're going to hear. It's not stuff we care about when we're talking about the human voice. So we can really be aggressive with cutting that. Now, I know because this is my standard chain, I know I'm going to be high passing this audio at about 80 hertz and maybe a little bit higher. So some of that is going to get cut out, right? There's going to be a high pass filter. It's going to roll off below 100 hertz. But that's the key. It rolls off below 100 hertz at a slope of about 12 dB per octave. That's what the particular plugin that I'm about to show you does. However, it rolls off. It's not completely killing all the energy down there. So what I want to do is I'm going to do a very narrow cut here at 60 hertz. Now, why 60? Well, in the US at least, the mains electricity that we get operates on a 60 hertz cycle. And so without going into the technical details, when you have that low, deep humming sound, typically the fundamental, in other words, the lowest tone of that humming sound is happening at 60 hertz because it's an electrical problem, probably some ground noise, if I had to guess. Now, you will hear that sound at higher frequencies as well. You will hear the harmonics of that sound. So you'll hear it at 120, 240, etc. But up there, 120, 240, and beyond, that is in the audible range of the human voice. So we don't want to cut out that stuff because then it's gonna have a detrimental effect on the voice. So here instead, we just cut at 60. Okay, and I'm pretty aggressive with it. We've got I'm cutting 9 dB here. Pretty tight Q. This is a third octave Q. I could go even tighter if I wanted to, but you know, so somewhere between 20 and 0.2 and 0.3 here on this particular EQ. But anyway, so tight Q. What this will do is this will take a lot of the energy out of the hum without affecting the voice. So it's kind of a free noise reduction without doing noise reduction per se. And the more energy we take out of the hum in the low end, the cleaner, the less headroom we're going to eat up at the end of the day, the cleaner it is. Okay, so there we go. Nice little trick there. Then we've got some denoise here. I'm using Isotopes RX voice denoise. Pretty self-explanatory. I've got some declicking because you also heard there's kind of like some there's some high frequency clicking going on. Now I think in this case it's probably like a bracelet or a necklace that the person's wearing, so it's not something we're going to be able to kill. It's not like an electrical clicking or something that problem with the recording process, but it does help tame that somewhat. It's not going to get rid of it, but it will tame that. And then I have the voice processing, right? De-essing, just kind of taming the SE frequencies around 5K. Again, I'm using the Isotope RX de-esser. Now let's get to the meat of it. This is the vocal processing and the EQ. As a default, I always start by filtering. By the way, this is the SSL channel strip. It's a very common channel strip. If you're not familiar with it, this is basically an adaptation of the channel strip that used to come in the solid state logic SSL giant mixing consoles. It's got filters here, low pass and high pass filter. We've got a 4-band EQ on the left, and we've got a dynamic section on the right. We've got a compressor and then a expander gate here. In my case, I'm using the filters. I'm using the 4-band EQ, and I'm not using the compressor, but I am using the expander gate. Okay, so in terms of noise, actually, we can talk about the expander gate. So I've cranked the range up to 20 here, which means that basically when this person stops talking, the expander will kick in and it's going to push down the signal by 20 dB. So pretty hard, but it's not completely killing it. It's not gating it off where it's just going to digital 0 and there's absolutely no sound. That would be very distracting, especially on a noisy track like this, because we're not going to kill all the noise. We're going to tame quite a bit of it. We're not going to kill all the noise. So what's important is we keep a consistent noise floor so that when he's not talking, it gets quieter, but it shouldn't be killed altogether, because otherwise it's going to be like, it's going to ratchet on and off, and that just calls more attention to the noise. Don't want to do that. Okay, so that's the expander gate. In terms of the EQ, this is a pretty standard move for me. I have a low pass filter at 16K, just kind of getting rid of whatever, super, super high end hash that might be up there that I probably can't hear anyway. And then low pass filter at 80 Hertz. So again, I'm rolling off all the frequencies below 80 Hertz in a slope. And then here, I'm not doing any other EQ except for in the low mids, I'm pulling out, I'm cutting 3 dB, 3.2 dB at 380 Hertz. So just pulling out, just kind of taming a little bit of mud that tends to build up there at that frequency. All right. Now, with all that in the chain, I'm going to disable my next EQ, which is another round of EQ, but I'm going to disable that for a second. So let's just hear where we're at now. So we've got noise reduction going on, and we've got just some basic low end shaping going on. And then at the very end of my chain, by the way, I have just kind of a leveling plugin called Vocal Writer that's just kind of making things smoother and more consistent. All right, so here's where we're at.
Yeah, no, Gabby was what actually prompted me to reach out to you guys because I
Okay,
love...
so it definitely sounds cleaner. I'll compare to the original. This is taking the whole chain out of the equation.
Yeah, no, Gabby was what actually prompted me to reach out to you guys because I loved her episode.
All right, let's kick it back in.
Yeah, no, Gabby was what actually prompted me to reach out to you guys because I loved her episode.
Okay, so it's definitely getting better. It's definitely getting cleaner, but it's still just kind of dark to me, especially when I compare it to the other voices in this show, right? So if I compare it to this other host here.
Different situation, different circumstances, and we get to dive into your categories and see.
He just has a more mid-rangey, kind of brighter, more animated sounding voice, right? So part of mixing is balancing each track against each other. And so since that one's brighter and the other host is brighter, we also want to make this track brighter too.
Yeah, no, Gabby was what actually prompted me to reach out.
Okay, so typically when you cut and you remove low end, everything will get brighter by default, just because you're removing stuff that's super, fat and bloated sounding. Now we've done that here, and it did get cleaner sounding, but it's still dark. It's still kind of dull sounding. So this is my last move, and maybe the most substantial one. I'm using the Soundtoys SIEQ, CQ, or SIQ, however you want to say it. I like this because it's very smooth when you're boosting quite a bit, and that's what I'm doing here. So I'm using this mid-range band, and I have it at the 3.5K setting. So it's boosting 3.5K in a very wide bell shape. So it's going to boost it's going to boost below 3.5K and above 3.5K as well. So it's a pretty wide band. And I'm boosting that by 4 dB. So I'm lifting that upper mid-range, which is where that brightness and excitement and intelligibility is going to come out. And then I'm also boosting the high band. Again, this is a very wide bell shape, and I'm boosting that by 6 dB. So it's quite a significant boost for voice, but it's very smooth. All right, I'm going to show that now. So I'm going to play you again. This is the whole chain, but without this extra EQ.
Yeah, no, Gabby was what actually prompted me to reach out to you guys
Nice.
because I loved her episode.
Okay, so still kind of dull. Let me kick it back. Let me kick in this EQ.
Yeah, no, Gabby was what actually prompted me to reach out to you guys
Nice.
because I loved her episode.
Yeah, much better. I'm going to flip that on and off here as I let
Yeah,
it play.
no, Gabby was what actually
bypass it?
prompted me to reach out to you guys
Nice.
because I loved her episode. And I think it's so cool when
And then back
people,
on.
I grew up, I'm 38, and I grew up in a time when,
So what we've done is we've rebalanced the frequency spectrum of this voice, right? We've pulled out a lot of mud in the very low end. We've pulled out some mud in the low mid-range, and then we've boosted the upper mid-range and the very high end quite a bit in order to rebalance this voice. And now it sounds much closer to our other hosts.
Different situation, different
In
circumstances,
terms of the
and we get to
frequency
dive in.
spectrum, right? Now, obviously, it's still got some echo going on. There's still some noise and some clicking and stuff. We're not going to be able to get rid of all of that, but now it's a much smoother sounding transition for the listener when they're moving from the host to this other speaker, this other guest that we just EQ'd. So anyway, this is a pretty heavy-handed processing for a podcast. I don't always make moves this drastic, but sometimes it's what you got to do. The last thing I'll say on this is that when you're making these moves, one of the reasons that I like interfaces with knobs, I like plugins with knobs instead of graphics, right? Here's a graphical EQ, does stuff like that. One of the reasons I don't like to use those and I use knobs instead is because I just sit there and I try to listen as I'm turning the knob up and down. I'm sweeping it around through a range as I'm listening. I'm not looking at the knob. And sometimes that's how I ended up boosting 6 dB of high end and 4 dB of upper mids because it sounded right. After the fact, I look at it, I'm like, wow, that's actually fairly heavy-handed for voice. Not something I would typically do, but it worked. So that's one of the advantages of using plugins that have knobs on them is that it's easier to sort of separate your brain, your analytical side of your brain from what your ears are hearing. And you just turn the knobs until your ears hear what they want to hear. And who cares what the settings are? Doesn't really matter. We got there in the end. So hope that is helpful. There's your podcast tip of the week.